Vector Transit Station 47, known across the pilgrimage corridors simply as the Threshold, stretched upward beyond immediate perception, its mirrored arches fading into bands of gold-white illumination high above Bastian Kane's workstation. Low harmonic vibrations trembled faintly through the gallery floor beneath his boots. The sound had long ago ceased to register consciously. It lived deeper now, somewhere inside habit and memory, as constant as breathing. He adjusted the gravimetric lattice manually. The Threshold did not require manual correction. Its resonance engines could process local flattening revisions for weeks without direct oversight. The station had operated for centuries before Bastian's assignment and would likely continue long after his death, quietly balancing stabilized space against the slow drift pressing endlessly against the choir's reach. But the work occupied his hands. Another resonance line shifted across the projection field above the console. Pale harmonic bands folded silently through one another. Bastian narrowed two values by less than a fractional degree and watched the alignment settle back into symmetry. By measured paths, he murmured automatically. The old calibration invocation left his mouth before he realized he had spoken. He paused only briefly, then continued working. Beyond the vaulted observation apertures, stabilized space stretched outward in perfect black stillness. No nearby stars interrupted the dark. Only distant resonance markers shimmered faintly along invisible pilgrimage corridors extending toward worlds Bastian would never see again. The Threshold existed where the harmonics of three distant stellar choir stars overlapped, balancing the transit geometry of hundreds of inhabited systems across local space. Merchant convoys, diplomatic vessels, archival couriers, civilian pilgrims, entire civilizations moved through corridors refined inside chambers like this one, and all of it required constant correction. Space drifted, gravity drifted, stars drifted, the choir compensated. Bastian reviewed the latest stellar displacement tables despite the station systems having already verified them twice. He rerouted a resonance synchronization cycle personally, rechecked corridor flattening tolerances, reviewed approach vectors for vessels still hours from local space. None of it required his attention. The work remained preferable to anticipation. He glanced toward the arrival registry before he could stop himself. Pilgrimage vessel Orison of Dawn remained on schedule. 3 hours until docking alignment. Bastian looked away immediately and adjusted another harmonic ratio that did not require adjustment. The vibrations beneath the gallery floor shifted almost imperceptibly as the Threshold recalibrated around him. Somewhere far below, resonance engines the size of cities continued their endless synchronized labor. He could feel them faintly through the station structure. Slow pulses moving through metal and distance. The station never truly felt still, only balanced. He remembered the first time he had heard the Threshold described as beautiful. A navigator initiate, years ago now, had compared the station to a cathedral reflected across perfectly still water. Two identical spires joined at an invisible horizon, perfect symmetry held against the dark. Celine had agreed with the comparison. Bastian tightened his jaw slightly and dismissed the memory before it settled too deeply. He keyed another correction into the lattice without checking whether the adjustment was necessary first. The alignment settled exactly where it had been before. He crossed the gallery slowly, his footsteps swallowed beneath the chamber's immense scale. Towering resonance columns lined the corridor ahead, their surfaces etched with harmonic notation that shimmered softly beneath the station's light. Portions belonged to Curator standardization. Other sections were older, much older. Symbols whose meanings had been ritualized long before Bastian's birth. The Curators preserved them anyway. Stewardship rarely required understanding. The thought should have comforted him more than it did. Another console accepted his authorization as he approached. Harmonic transit corridors unfolded across the chamber air in overlapping bands of pale light, delicate as fractures spreading through glass. The Orison of Dawn glimmered faintly along one corridor projection, still distant beyond the local resonance boundary. Right on schedule. He hated that he had already checked 6 times. Bastian keyed another recalibration sequence into the system and watched the corridor stabilize again. The movement soothed him. Numbers behaved predictably. Resonance equations either aligned or they did not. People expected meanings from one another. That was where things became dangerous. He moved deeper into the gallery while system chimes echoed softly through the vaulted chamber behind him. Threshold crews rarely exceeded 100 personnel despite the station's immense scale. Entire habitation wings remained dark for months at a time. Vast, ceremonial chambers stood empty except during major pilgrimage convergences. The Curators built for permanence. Human occupancy had become secondary centuries ago, or perhaps inevitable loneliness had simply been mistaken for reverence over time. Bastian entered a smaller observatory alcove overlooking the mirrored lower half of the threshold far beneath him. Gold-white illumination traced the station's exterior arches against the black, the reflected lower structure hanging beneath it like another world suspended upside down. Perfect symmetry, perfect balance, a structure suspended between stabilized and unstabilized space, endlessly compensating for invisible strain. His reflection stared back faintly from the observation glass. Older than he expected sometimes, not physically. The years had not marked him heavily yet, but isolation accumulated differently, in silence, in routine, in the instinct to end conversations before they became personal. 10 years. 10 years since Antiphon Vigil collapsed into stellar fire. 10 years since evacuation riots consumed entire orbital districts while transit corridors failed beneath the strain of civilian panic. 10 years since Bastian Kane had decided humanity deserved the truth. His fingers tightened unconsciously against the edge of the console. "The harmony still leads us home," he said quietly. The memorial phrase lingered in the silence afterward. He did not know whether he still believed it, or whether he still deserved to. A soft chime interrupted the thought. Docking control had issued preliminary approach confirmation. The Orison of Dawn had entered local resonance space. Bastian closed the transit registry without reading the remainder of the report, then reopened it several seconds later. Approach vectors unfolded across the observatory field in pale streams of harmonic light. The vessel moved with measured precision through the outer resonance corridors, its transit wake barely disturbing the surrounding alignment lattice. Still on schedule. Of course she was. A small part of him, quiet and deeply unwelcome, felt relieved. Bastian exhaled slowly and shut the display again. He told himself he should return to the recalibration chambers. There were still corridor tolerances to verify before docking synchronization began. The work mattered. It always had. Because work remained simpler than wanting things he no longer trusted himself to keep. But beneath the steady harmonic pulse of the threshold, anticipation had already settled into him like a second heartbeat. The first docking tones resonated through the threshold nearly 40 minutes later. Bastian heard them before the system display updated. 3 low harmonic pulses moved through the station structure beneath his feet, subtle enough that most personnel probably no longer noticed them consciously. To the navigators, though, the tones carried meaning as precise as language. The vibrations lingered faintly in the metal long after the tones themselves faded. Pilgrimage arrival, outer synchronization complete. Local resonance alignment beginning. Bastian remained at the calibration console for several seconds afterward while docking telemetry updated in measured streams of light around him. The Orison of Dawn had entered final approach geometry. He should have delegated the docking synchronization. There were at least 4 other qualified personnel on duty within this cycle. The threshold processed dozens of pilgrimage arrivals every month without requiring his direct supervision. Instead, he keyed authorization into the console and transferred docking authority to his station personally. The system accepted immediately. Of course it did. The justification arrived afterward, precise and procedural. He knew the Orison of Dawn's approach tolerances better than the current shift navigators. Pilgrimage traffic had increased this quarter. Local corridor drift remained slightly elevated after the last recalibration cycle. All technically true, none of it the reason. He crossed the resonance gallery in silence while the threshold adjusted around the incoming vessel. Harmonic pulses rolled faintly through the station structure at regular intervals now, synchronization rhythms spreading outward from the docking spires beneath the lower half of the station. Gold-white illumination brightened gradually along the gallery walls as arrival procedures activated throughout nearby sections of the threshold. Reflected light moved slowly across the mirrored arches overhead like sunlight beneath still water. The station always felt different during docking cycles. Not alive, but less empty. Bastian descended through 2 transit lifts toward the lower synchronization halls. The lift chamber moved almost silently within the station's mirrored central axis, while resonance lights glimmered far above and below him in perfect reflection. For a moment, the threshold appeared endless. The lift settled into the lower halls with a soft, mechanical pulse. Curator personnel moved through the corridor ahead in measured routines. Most wore the layered gray and white station vestments common to threshold operations crews, though several navigators had already arrived from earlier docking preparations. Their dark transit cloaks carried faint harmonic threadwork along the sleeves, visible only when corridor light shifted against the fabric. The synchronization halls smelled faintly of heated metal and recycled air. Beneath it all lingered the familiar vibration of resonance machinery buried deep within the station structure. No one seemed surprised to see Bastian present personally for docking synchronization. If they found it unusual, professionalism prevented comment. Or perhaps everyone had long ago learned which subjects were safer left untouched around him. A junior resonance attendant inclined her head respectfully as he passed. "Supervisor Kane." Bastian returned the gesture automatically and continued toward the primary docking chamber. The chamber itself occupied nearly half a kilometer of open vertical space beneath the lower spine of the threshold. Vast docking spars extended inward through layers of harmonic stabilization fields, each one glowing softly as synchronization patterns shifted across their surfaces. Beyond them, the orison of dawn emerged slowly from darkness. The vessel moved with almost unnerving precision through the final approach corridor. Long cathedral-like hull structures extended behind its forward transit spires in layered symmetry, silver-white plating reflecting the threshold's illumination in narrow streams across the surrounding black. Pilgrimage vessels were built to resemble processional architecture more than military or civilian craft. Their proportions emphasized ascent, height, and harmonic balance rather than efficiency. Celine used to argue that appearance itself affected resonance stability during long-distance transit. Bastian had once spent nearly 2 hours insisting that was mathematically impossible. He remembered losing the argument. He also remembered enjoying it more than he admitted at the time. Docking harmonics pulsed again through the chamber. The orison of dawn rotated fractionally into alignment with the threshold's lower docking axis. Stabilization fields shimmered faintly around the vessel's hull as local resonance synchronized with the station. Perfect alignment. "Approach geometry confirmed," one of the threshold navigators announced from the lower console tiers. The voice echoed softly upward through the chamber's immense open space. Another voice answered from the vessel itself. "Receiving synchronization lock. Choir alignment remains stable." Bastian recognized Celine immediately. 10 years had changed the sound of her voice less than he expected. That unsettled him more than hearing her voice itself. Some part of him had apparently expected distance to solve things eventually. Distance had solved nothing. He moved toward the upper synchronization console before anyone could notice his hesitation. The docking sequence continued around him in practiced coordination. Harmonic equations unfolded across the chamber displays, while resonance stabilizers adjusted local transit geometry by microscopic degrees. Everything remained calm, measured, ceremonial. The Curators had transformed navigation into ritual centuries ago. Or perhaps ritual had always been necessary for systems this large. The orison of dawn settled into final docking alignment with almost imperceptible motion. Massive stabilization clamps extended inward from the threshold's lower structure and locked against the vessel's transit spars, one after another in perfect synchronization. A deep harmonic pulse rolled through the chamber floor and surrounding walls. Docking complete. For several seconds, the chamber remained nearly silent except for the low resonance vibrations moving through the station around them. Then, arrival permissions began unfolding across the synchronization displays. Crew transfer authorization, pilgrimage access routes, cargo clearance, resonance recalibration schedules. Bastian focused on the data streams with deliberate concentration. Work remained easier than anticipation. Movement below the upper observation tier drew his attention despite himself. Navigator personnel had begun crossing from the vessel into the threshold through the lower transit bridge. Dark transit cloaks moved slowly through pale station light, while harmonic threadwork shimmered softly along their sleeves. Celine Vale walked near the front of the delegation. She wore navigator transit vestments beneath a dark harmonic cloak marked with the silver-lined insignia of the navigator's creed. Time had altered small things, the sharper lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight economy in her movements that long transit years seemed to teach every senior navigator eventually, but she still moved with the same measured certainty he remembered from the initiate halls. Like she had never learned to distrust stability. Bastian looked away before she could glance upward toward the observation tier. He keyed another synchronization verification into the console. Already completed. The system returned confirmation immediately. He hated that she would know exactly what that meant. Still checking your own numbers manually? The voice came from behind him. Bastian closed the display before turning. Celine stood several meters away near the edge of the upper platform. The surrounding chamber light reflected softly along the silver threadwork of her transit cloak. Harmonic vibrations moved faintly through the platform beneath them both. There was no accusation in her expression. That somehow made it worse. Threshold protocols require manual oversight during pilgrimage convergence, Bastian said. Celine's mouth curved slightly. That wasn't what I asked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The harmonic vibrations beneath the chamber floor continued their slow, measured rhythm. Steady, balanced, familiar, too familiar. Your approach geometry drifted slightly entering local space, Bastian said finally. 3 fractional deviations along the outer corridor. Celine studied him for another second before answering. You noticed that from the threshold? Yes. We corrected before corridor instability thresholds. You corrected late. Something quieter passed briefly between them then. Not irritation, recognition. The old rhythm of disagreement settling instinctively back into place. Neither of them seemed entirely certain what to do with it anymore. Celine glanced toward the docking chamber below before returning her attention to him. You're looking well, Bastian. The lie was gentle enough to almost sound sincere. Bastian folded his hands behind his back. The threshold remains operational. That also wasn't what I said. He almost smiled despite himself. Almost. A soft synchronization chime interrupted the moment. Pilgrimage recalibration schedules unfolded across the upper displays around them in pale harmonic light. Celine glanced toward the projections. I'll need updated corridor harmonics before departure. You'll have them. I expected you'd insist on supervising personally. Bastian looked back toward the chamber below. The orison of dawn remained suspended within the docking spars like a cathedral pinned motionless inside the threshold's lower spine. I supervise everything personally, he said. The words sounded more defensive than he intended. Celine was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said softly. I know. The recalibration chamber occupied one of the inner resonance vaults near the threshold's central axis. Unlike the docking halls below, the chamber had been built for precision rather than ceremony. Curved walls of pale metal rose around layered harmonic consoles arranged in descending rings toward the center of the room. Above them, resonance projections drifted slowly through the air in overlapping geometric patterns that shifted continuously as local transit corridors updated across nearby sectors. The room hummed softly with harmonic activity. Not loud, constant. Low vibrations moved faintly through the floor beneath the consoles, while pale harmonic light rotated across the chamber walls in slow cycles. The air carried the familiar scent of warmed circuitry and recycled atmosphere. Bastian preferred chambers like this one. The systems here behaved predictably. Resonance equations either resolved or they did not. Drift calculations either stabilized or they failed. People complicated stable systems unnecessarily. Celine stood across the central console reviewing transit harmonics when he entered. Pale projection light moved across the dark folds of her transit cloak, while corridor equations reflected faintly along the polished surface beneath her hands. She glanced up briefly. "You're late. You're early." The Orison completed docking 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Bastian moved to the opposite side of the console and activated the local corridor projections between them. "You're overcompensating your outer corridor compression." Celine exhaled softly through her nose. There he is. Harmonic pathways unfolded outward across the chamber in pale arcs of light, intersecting and diverging in layered synchronization patterns. The shifting projections reflected across both of them as the recalibration lattice stabilized between the consoles. The recalibration process began almost automatically after that. Bastian adjusted local flattening tolerances, while Celine reviewed transit corridor resonance drift from the Orison's inbound passage. Neither needed to explain their calculations aloud. Each correction prompted another instinctively, years of shared curator training reasserting itself beneath the conversation, or beneath the silence. The familiarity unsettled him more than the silence did. "Pilgrimage traffic increased," Celine said after several minutes. "The outer pilgrimage corridors are compressing again. Then stagger departures. That adds 3 days to transit. 3.2. Celine glanced upward without fully looking away from the projections. "You used to wait longer before correcting me. You used to make fewer mistakes." A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth before disappearing again. The chamber lights dimmed fractionally as local resonance cycles shifted around them. Harmonic projections rotated slowly overhead, reflecting pale gold across the curved walls and console surfaces. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable, just familiar. Outside the chamber, distant resonance pulses moved faintly through the threshold structure like a slow mechanical heartbeat. There had been a time when Bastian could spend hours inside silences like this with her and never feel the need to fill them. Now, every quiet moment seemed aware of what had happened afterward. Celine finally adjusted one of the outer corridor alignments and leaned back slightly from the console. Threshold traffic reports mentioned increased secular survey activity near the Perseid sectors. Bastian continued reviewing the harmonic lattice. "They've been requesting expanded corridor access for months. And the Curators denied it. You sound surprised." "I sound tired." Celine studied him briefly. "You still read the external survey journals?" It was not a question. Bastian adjusted another resonance variable unnecessarily before answering. "Some of them remain mathematically competent." That almost sounded complimentary. "Don't repeat it publicly." Celine's expression softened slightly before she looked back toward the corridor projections. The secular scientific coalitions had grown steadily during the last century, not openly hostile to the Curators, not usually, but increasingly impatient with inherited systems they could maintain without fully understanding, or believed they could. Bastian understood the frustration more than he admitted publicly. That alone would have made many Curators distrust him long before Antiphon Vigil. Celine narrowed one of the corridor harmonics and frowned slightly. These fluctuations weren't this severe 3 months ago. Bastian looked up from the console. "What fluctuations?" Celine expanded a section of the projection field between them. Minor inconsistencies moved through several local corridor harmonics, small enough to escape attention unless someone was specifically searching for them. Fractional drift irregularities. Momentary synchronization instability. Nothing dangerous. Not yet. I compensated manually during the final approach, Celine said quietly. The corridor response lagged twice entering local space. Bastian studied the harmonic patterns more carefully. That shouldn't happen. I know. The chamber hummed steadily around them while resonance projections rotated overhead in synchronized motion. Pale harmonic light drifted slowly across Celine's face as she watched the fluctuating corridor data. Bastian reviewed the corridor patterns again. Everything appeared stable. Everything resolved correctly. He kept searching anyway. Celine watched him work for several moments before speaking again. You're doing it again. Bastian did not look up. Doing what? Looking for disasters before they happen. His hands slowed fractionally across the console's surface. The chamber remained quiet except for the low harmonic vibrations moving through the surrounding walls. I was right about antiphon Vigil, he said finally. Celine's expression tightened slightly. Yes, she said. You were. Bastian waited. She did not continue immediately. When the collapse began, she said carefully, millions of people died trying to reach transit corridors that were never designed to carry that kind of evacuation volume. I remember. I know you do. The words lingered between them. Neither raised their voice, neither needed to. Bastian returned his attention to the harmonic lattice. The system was already dying. Yes. No one was telling them. Celine rested one hand lightly against the console edge. No one knew what would happen once panic spread. Bastian almost answered immediately, then stopped. Because part of him hated that she might have been right too. And another part hated that he still wanted her to understand why he had done it anyway. The meal hall occupied one of Threshold's older habitation tiers near the station's central spine. Unlike the resonance vaults, little effort had been made to modernize the chamber completely. Portions of the original Curator architecture remained visible beneath later reconstruction. Vaulted ceilings supported by pale stone arches, long recessed alcoves lined with harmonic inscriptions, and narrow observation windows overlooking the black beyond the station hull. Modern illumination panels and projection systems had been integrated carefully into the older structure rather than replacing it. Gold-white light reflected softly across polished metal surfaces, while ancient carved reliefs remained undisturbed along the surrounding walls. Faint harmonic vibrations moved through the floor beneath the chamber like a distant pulse. The threshold had been rebuilt many times. It had never entirely abandoned its past. Bastian arrived later than most of the active station crews. The evening cycle had already settled into its usual rhythms by the time he entered. Low conversation moved quietly between the long communal tables while service attendants crossed the chamber carrying heated trays and ceramic vessels marked with Curator harmonic sigils. No one spoke loudly. The Curators rarely did. Soft utensil movements and quiet conversation blended with the faint resonance hum moving through the station beneath them. The chamber smelled faintly of warmed grain, recycled air, and heated metal from the service alcoves lining the far wall. Celine sat near the center of one of the longer tables among several visiting navigators from the orison of dawn. Pale station light reflected softly along the silver threadwork of her transit cloak. She glanced toward the entrance as Bastian entered the hall, though she did not signal to him immediately. He considered leaving before anyone noticed him. Too late. Supervisor Kane called one of the station archivists from farther down the hall. You're joining us tonight? Several nearby conversations quieted almost imperceptibly. Not enough to appear deliberate, enough for Bastian to notice. I was previously unaware meal attendance required formal confirmation, he answered. A few restrained smiles appeared around the nearby tables. The archivist inclined his head politely. "Only from you." Bastian collected a tray from one of the attendants and moved toward the open seating near Celine's table before he could reconsider the decision. The Threshold's meal cycles remained heavily ritualized despite the station's isolation. Seating arrangements shifted according to operational rank and current assignment rotations, though the system allowed enough flexibility that the structure rarely appeared overtly rigid. Usually. Celine watched him approach over the rim of a ceramic drinking vessel. "You're disrupting several standing assumptions simply by appearing here voluntarily," she said. "One assumes the Threshold will recover." Eventually. Bastian took the empty seat across from her. The surrounding conversations resumed gradually once it became clear no confrontation intended to develop from his arrival. A navigator, seated farther down the table, nodded respectfully toward Bastian. "Your recalibration schedules reached the Orison already. Efficient work." "Threshold systems remain operational," Bastian replied automatically. Celine glanced sideways at him briefly. The navigator continued without noticing. "We passed 3 Meridian Institute survey flotillas crossing inward through the Perseid sectors. Largest traffic volume I've seen in years." "That's becoming common," said another curator farther along the table. "The secular coalitions are expanding faster than the Synod expected. They still rely on choir corridors. For now." The response carried no hostility, only certainty. Bastian focused on the meal in front of him while the conversation shifted around the table. Most of the food served aboard the Threshold was heavily standardized. Nutrient grain, processed protein, preserved fruit cultures imported through pilgrimage routes. Functional rather than luxurious. Still, the curators insisted upon ceremonial presentation even here. Ceramic dishes bore harmonic engravings along their edges, while attendants arranged trays with almost liturgical precision. Everything aboard the Threshold seemed arranged according to ritual, or perhaps ritual had become the only remaining proof that civilization still believed in permanence. "The seculars are pushing farther beyond stabilized sectors every year," one of the navigators observed. "Sooner or later they'll force corridor expansion." "Expansion requires choir harmonics," another replied calmly. "Not ambition." Celine rested one arm lightly against the table. "They're not entirely wrong to ask questions." Several nearby conversations quieted slightly again. Not dramatically, just enough. Bastian noticed one of the junior attendants abruptly redirect herself toward another section of the hall rather than pass near their table. The older curator seated near the end of the table folded his hands together carefully before answering. Questions are healthy. Public certainty about incomplete knowledge is not. Bastian recognized the phrasing immediately. Curator doctrine. Truth without wisdom destroys civilizations. Celine recognized it too. Neither commented. The older curator turned slightly toward Bastian. "You worked briefly with the secular observatories before your Threshold assignment, didn't you?" The question had been asked politely. Too politely. Bastian set down his utensils carefully. "I reviewed external stellar survey data for 6 months. And your opinion?" Several people at the table avoided looking directly toward him now. Others watched too carefully. Beyond the narrow observation windows lining the chamber wall, distant stars glimmered faintly through stabilized space. Bastian considered giving the expected answer. The safe one. Instead, "I think they're asking questions the curators stopped asking a long time ago." Silence spread briefly across the surrounding section of the hall. Not hostile, worse, cautious. No one seemed shocked by the statement itself, only by hearing him say it aloud. The older curator studied him for several seconds. "And where did questions lead Antiphon Vigil?" Celine answered before Bastian could. "They led to the discovery that the system was collapsing." The older curator's expression remained composed. "And the aftermath?" Celine did not answer immediately. Neither did Bastian. Around them, conversation continued elsewhere throughout the meal hall, though more quietly than before. Ceramic cups touched tabletops softly while service attendants crossed between the tables beneath the pale vaulted arches overhead. Finally, Celine spoke. The aftermath was human. Bastian looked toward her despite himself. The older curator leaned back slightly in his chair. A charitable interpretation. A truthful one, Celine replied. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The older curator eventually inclined his head slightly and allowed the conversation to shift elsewhere. Operational schedules replaced philosophical debate with visible relief from several personnel seated nearby. The hall relaxed again, gradually, but not entirely. Bastian returned his attention to the untouched portion of his meal. You didn't need to do that, he said quietly once the nearby conversations had moved on. Celine kept her gaze on the hall around them. Yes, she said. I did. Neither spoke for several moments afterward. The threshold vibrated faintly beneath the chamber floor, distant resonance engines maintaining their endless harmonic balance somewhere far below the station. Around them, curators continued eating, speaking quietly, discussing transit schedules and resonance reports beneath the vaulted arches of a station older than most planetary governments. Stable, orderly, enduring. And for the first time that evening, Bastian found himself wondering how much of that stability depended upon everyone agreeing not to look too closely beneath it. Bastian left the meal hall before the evening cycle fully ended. No one attempted to stop him. The threshold's inner corridors had grown quieter by the time he reached the upper habitation tiers. Most active personnel remained gathered in the communal halls below, while the station settled gradually back into its normal operational rhythms. Soft harmonic vibrations moved faintly through the walls beneath the silence. Constant, measured. The corridor lighting dimmed automatically as he walked, responding to localized movement patterns along the nearly empty passageways. Pale gold-white illumination followed him in slow intervals across polished floors and curved metallic walls. His footsteps echoed softly through the otherwise vacant corridor before fading back into the station's low resonance hum. The threshold always felt largest during its quieter cycles, like a structure built for more people than would ever inhabit it again. Or perhaps like something built by a civilization that had once expected to last forever. Bastian slowed near one of the outer observation galleries overlooking stabilized space beyond the station hull. The chamber stood empty. Long observation windows curved upward into darkness above him while distant resonance markers glimmered faintly beyond the glass like stationary stars suspended inside black water. Reflections of the gallery lighting drifted softly across the observation panes whenever the station's harmonic cycles shifted. He rested one hand lightly against the edge of the observation railing. The metal felt faintly warm from the station's internal resonance systems. Stillness settled around him almost immediately, not silence. The threshold was never truly silent. Somewhere far below, resonance engines continued their endless harmonic labor, subtle vibrations rising through the station structure in slow, repeating pulses. Bastian closed his eyes briefly. For several moments, he allowed himself not to think. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the attempt. Measured, unhurried, soft echoes moved through the gallery entrance before the figure itself appeared. He recognized the cadence before turning around. Celine stopped several meters behind him near the entrance to the gallery. I wondered how long you'd last downstairs. I stayed longer than usual. That's true. Neither moved immediately. The gallery's curved observation windows reflected pale station light softly around them, while stabilized stars glimmered faintly beyond the glass. Between the distant resonance markers, open space stretched outward in endless black stillness. You embarrassed Archivist Talron, Celine said eventually. He invited philosophical discussion during meal cycle. He made the mistake of assuming you'd avoid participating. Bastian looked back toward the observation windows. I usually do. Celine crossed the gallery slowly and stopped beside the railing several feet away from him. Not close enough to touch, close enough to remember. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain, only crowded. A faint harmonic pulse moved through the gallery floor beneath their feet. "You shouldn't have defended me," Bastian said finally. Celine rested both hands lightly against the railing. "I wasn't defending everything you did. That's not how they heard it." "I know." The answer arrived too quickly for comfort. Bastian studied the distant resonance markers beyond the station hull. Tiny points of harmonic light shimmered faintly within stabilized space, marking invisible transit corridors stretching across hundreds of inhabited systems. "You still think I was wrong?" Celine remained quiet for several seconds before answering. "I think you were right about the collapse. That wasn't the question." "No," she agreed softly. "It wasn't." The harmonic vibrations beneath the gallery floor continued their slow, measured rhythm. Steady, balanced. "You released incomplete information to billions of frightened people," Celine said carefully. "You bypassed every containment protocol the Curators had." "Because they were hiding it." "Yes." Bastian looked toward her. "They would have let the system die quietly. They were trying to prevent panic. They prevented evacuation." Celine's expression tightened slightly. "They prevented total collapse across neighboring sectors." The words lingered between them. Beyond the observation glass, distant harmonic lights drifted almost imperceptibly against the surrounding dark. Bastian looked away first. There it was, the fracture neither of them could fully cross. And still, neither of them seemed willing to walk away from it. "I know what people say about me," he said after a while. Celine did not answer immediately. "You think I don't?" Bastian almost smiled at that. Almost. Distant resonance light drifted slowly across the observation glass. "They say you chose truth over civilization," Celine continued quietly. "And you?" Celine watched the stars beyond the gallery windows before answering. "I think you chose truth because you couldn't survive pretending not to see it." Bastian frowned slightly. "That isn't better." "No," Celine said. "It isn't." The honesty of the answer hurt more than disagreement would have, because some part of him had wanted absolution from her, and because she refused to lie to him even now. Neither spoke for several moments afterward. The gallery remained still around them, suspended between darkness and harmonic light. Finally, Celine exhaled softly. "You disappeared after the tribunal." Bastian's jaw tightened slightly. "The Curators made their position clear. They exiled you from the Synod academies, not from humanity. Some days the distinction feels narrow." Celine turned toward him more fully now. Pale station light reflected softly along the silver lining of her transit cloak. "You stopped answering transmissions. I was occupied. You isolated yourself on the edge of stabilized space." Bastian did not respond. Celine studied him carefully. "You still think you're dangerous?" The statement landed softly, like something she had understood for a very long time. Bastian looked down toward the lower observation levels beneath the gallery. "The last time I convinced people to listen to me," he said quietly, "billions died." Celine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly then. Not pity. Something worse. Understanding. "The riots killed those people," she said. "Fear killed them. Institutional failure killed them. They died because I told the truth. They died because civilization wasn't prepared to hear it." Bastian laughed once under his breath, a tired sound without humor. "That sounds dangerously close to agreeing with me." Celine's mouth curved faintly. "Don't sound so hopeful." The words surprised him enough that he looked toward her fully. She looked away almost immediately afterward. The movement felt uncharacteristically uncertain for her. For the first time that evening, Bastian realized Celine might be just as afraid of this conversation as he was, because fear implied possibility. A soft harmonic pulse moved through the station beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, docking systems recalibrated for outbound pilgrimage cycles. Faint mechanical tones echoed through the deeper structure of the threshold before fading again into stillness. Life aboard the threshold continued. Steady, ordered, predictable. Celine rested one hand lightly against the observation railing again. "You don't have to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself alone, Bastian." He stared out toward stabilized space beyond the station hull. The answer arrived immediately, not because he believed it completely, because he no longer knew how to live any other way. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." The first indication arrived less than an hour later. Not an alarm, not even a warning, just absence. Bastian felt it before he consciously understood it. A subtle shift moved through the threshold beneath his feet while he and Celine crossed one of the upper transit corridors toward the central resonance lifts. The station's familiar harmonic pulse, constant for as long as he had lived aboard the threshold, faltered almost imperceptibly for a fraction of a second, then resumed. Bastian stopped walking immediately. Celine took 2 more steps before noticing he had stopped behind her. "What is it?" Bastian did not answer right away. The corridor around them remained unchanged. Pale illumination reflected softly across the curved metallic walls while distant resonance vibrations continued moving faintly through the structure beneath their feet. Steady, balanced, normal. And yet, something had been missing, only briefly, like hearing a familiar piece of music skip a single note. The human mind noticed missing patterns faster than new ones. Bastian turned slowly toward the nearest harmonic relay panel built into the corridor wall. Celine watched him carefully now. "Bastian." The resonance cycle shifted. "That happens constantly. Not like that." He keyed authorization into the relay panel faster than he realized he was moving. Harmonic diagnostics unfolded across the corridor display in pale streams of light while local synchronization systems updated around them. Everything appeared stable. No warning indicators, no drift failures, no corridor collapse alerts. The relay panel emitted its usual low harmonic tone while data streamed across the display. Around them, the threshold continued humming softly through metal and distance. Stable systems comforted people because they implied predictability. Bastian had learned long ago how fragile that comfort actually was. Celine crossed toward the display beside him. "What are you looking for?" Bastian expanded the local harmonic records without answering. The data streams updated normally. Choir harmonics stable. Transit corridors synchronized. Resonance balance within acceptable thresholds. Nothing wrong, and still the back of his neck remained cold. He reviewed the previous resonance cycle manually. Then again, Celine remained silent beside him while pale harmonic projections reflected across both of them. Distant corridor lights glimmered softly behind the display field, their reflections wavering faintly across the polished wall panels. Finally, Bastian stopped scrolling. A single harmonic interval remained partially desynchronized from the surrounding lattice. Tiny, fractional, impossible to notice unless someone had already been searching for irregularities. Celine frowned slightly. What caused that? Bastian zoomed further inward across the interrupted harmonic band. The surrounding resonance patterns compensated almost immediately after the interruption occurred. Local stabilization systems had corrected automatically before any transit corridors destabilized. But the interruption itself remained. One harmonic source had vanished momentarily from the lattice, then returned. Bastian felt his pulse slow, not calm. Focus. That shouldn't exist, he said quietly. Celine studied the display more carefully. A relay fluctuation? No. Then what? Bastian did not answer immediately, because he did not know, and because he already hated the shape of the possibilities forming in his mind. The corridor around them remained almost perfectly still. Far below, distant resonance engines continued their endless, synchronized labor beneath the threshold's immense structure. Then, the harmonic pulse vanished again. This time, both of them felt it. Celine looked up sharply. The corridor lights dimmed fractionally for less than a second before stabilizing again. A faint metallic groan moved through the station structure somewhere far beneath them as automatic compensators adjusted local resonance balance. Around them, nearby relay panels flickered softly across the corridor walls. Not failure, hesitation. The sensation passed almost immediately. But the silence left behind felt wrong, not quieter, empty, like standing inside a room after someone stopped breathing. Bastian moved back toward the relay display. Local harmonic systems began compensating automatically across the lattice again. Stabilization equations unfolded faster now as the threshold redistributed corridor balance across nearby resonance fields. Celine looked toward him. "Tell me what that was." Bastian reviewed the incoming synchronization data as rapidly as the system could display it, then stopped moving entirely. One of the stellar choir harmonics had disappeared from the local resonance lattice. Not weakened, not drifting. Gone, only for a fraction of a second, but long enough for the threshold to register the absence. "No," Bastian said quietly. Celine stepped closer to the display. "What?" Bastian enlarged the synchronization field between them. 3 primary harmonic sources formed the local stabilization lattice surrounding the threshold. Their overlapping resonance fields maintained corridor balance across hundreds of inhabited systems throughout the sector. Except now, one of the harmonic signatures contained a momentary void, a break in the lattice itself. "That's impossible," Celine whispered. Bastian barely heard her. His attention remained fixed on the empty interval embedded within the harmonic field. The silence inside the data frightened him more than any system failure alarm could have, because systems failed loudly. This had not failed. It had stopped. The corridor speakers crackled softly overhead. "Threshold central to all active personnel. Stand by for local harmonic verification procedures. Repeat. Stand by for verification procedures." The announcement remained calm. Too calm. Bastian recognized the tone immediately. Controlled uncertainty, the kind institutions used when they needed time before admitting they were afraid. The corridor lights dimmed again, longer this time. Several distant resonance pulses moving through the station beneath them failed to return. The vibrations beneath the floor changed subtly afterward. Not weaker, incomplete. Celine looked toward the surrounding corridor as if listening for something neither of them could fully hear anymore. Then the harmonic silence spread. Not physically, perceptually. Bastian felt it move through the threshold like pressure leaving a sealed chamber. The station's endless background resonance no longer felt continuous. Tiny absences lingered inside it now, gaps too small for language but large enough for instinct. A missing presence, an absence vast enough for the human mind to notice even before understanding why. For the first time in his life, one of the stellar choir stars had gone silent, and somewhere deep beneath the rising cold in his chest, Bastian realized he had just felt civilization lose something it had assumed would exist forever. He knew this feeling. The quiet wrongness before panic. The moment before institutions began deciding what truths people were allowed to survive hearing. The threshold entered restricted operational status within 19 minutes. Transit corridors across the station narrowed automatically as bulkhead systems redirected personnel movement toward essential sectors only. Harmonic verification teams flooded the central resonance halls while curator officials moved through the station with increasingly controlled urgency. No one used the word emergency. Not yet. Institutions delayed language like that for as long as possible. Naming fear made it harder to contain. Bastian and Celine descended through the central resonance lifts toward the primary synchronization chambers alongside 3 verification attendants summoned from the Threshold's Harmonic Analysis Division. The lift chamber remained almost perfectly silent during the descent. Only the low vibration of the station's resonance engines moved faintly through the floor beneath them. Incomplete now. Bastian could still feel the absence inside the harmonic lattice. The missing rhythm lingered like pressure behind his thoughts. Pale, harmonic light drifted slowly across the lift walls while resonance indicators updated in soft, gold-white intervals overhead. No one inside the chamber looked directly at anyone else for very long. One of the attendants finally broke the silence. Could it be relay corruption? No, Bastian answered immediately. The attendant glanced toward him cautiously. We've never seen harmonic interruption at this scale before. That isn't relay corruption. Celine remained beside the lift wall without speaking. Bastian suspected she already understood why he sounded afraid. Not because the systems were failing, because something impossible had happened first. The lift settled into the lower synchronization levels with a soft mechanical pulse. The primary resonance chamber beyond had transformed completely since Bastian last saw it. Normally, the chamber moved with ritualized precision, measured calculations, calm procedural cadence, controlled harmonic oversight. Now the room carried the restrained atmosphere of institutional disbelief. Dozens of harmonic projections filled the air above the chamber floor. Curator analysts moved rapidly between console tiers while synchronization equations updated continuously across overlapping resonance fields. Voices remained controlled, but movement had accelerated beneath the restraint. And everywhere beneath the activity remained the same terrible absence, one missing harmonic source. The chamber itself seemed subtly wrong now. Familiar resonance vibrations moved unevenly through the surrounding structure while several projection fields flickered faintly at irregular intervals before stabilizing again. Like the threshold itself, no longer trusted its own balance. Bastian crossed toward the nearest central projection array before anyone could stop him. Local corridor harmonics unfolded across the chamber air, then wider sector lattices, then the full regional synchronization map surrounding the threshold. The void remained visible in all of them, a gap inside the choir lattice itself. One of the senior verification officials noticed Bastian standing at the projection field and approached quickly. Supervisor Kane. Bastian barely looked toward him. Which harmonic source? The official hesitated. We're still verifying. Which source? The official expanded a section of the regional lattice reluctantly. A single stellar choir harmonic identifier brightened near the outer edge of the sector projection. Benedictio nonus. Status: non-responsive. Bastian stared at the projection. Benedictio nonus, one of the oldest stabilized stars within human-controlled space. A choir source that had remained active longer than some galactic species had been able to leave their home planets. And now the lattice displayed its absence with the same calm, procedural certainty it used for ordinary corridor drift. Celine stepped closer beside him. Maybe it's temporary. Bastian looked toward the synchronization field again. No, he said quietly, because the harmonic silence was widening. Not dramatically, fractionally, but the surrounding resonance lattice had already begun redistributing corridor strain away from the missing source. The threshold systems were adapting, as though the absence had become real. Nearby analysts continued speaking in tightly controlled tones around the chamber. Attempt long-range resonance confirmation again. Negative response from outer synchronization relays. Recalculate corridor strain projections. Notify Synod oversight before the Meridian Institute hears about this. The last statement settled sharply through the surrounding chamber. No one responded immediately. Bastian understood why. because the implications already extended beyond system failure. If a stellar choir star could disappear, the thought refused completion. Not because he could not imagine the answer, because imagining it made the foundations of civilization feel suddenly negotiable. Celine folded her arms lightly across herself while studying the synchronization field. Has this ever happened before? One of the nearby officials answered quietly without looking away from his console. No. Not in recorded human history. The chamber lights dimmed fractionally again. This time, several harmonic projections flickered visibly before stabilizing. A low murmur spread briefly across the lower console tiers before being suppressed almost immediately. Even fear here remained disciplined. Bastian watched the synchronization lattice compensate in real time. Transit corridors shifted, resonance loads redistributed, pilgrimage geometries recalculated automatically across neighboring sectors. The threshold was trying to survive the absence, because systems only adapted like this when something irreversible had already occurred. A new transmission unfolded suddenly across the central chamber displays. Priority, Synod Directive. All harmonic data classified pending verification. External transmissions restricted. All personnel subject to informational containment protocols. The chamber became very quiet after that. Bastian felt Celine look toward him before he turned. Neither of them spoke immediately. They did not need to. The memory between them surfaced instantly. Antiphon Vigil, containment protocols, controlled information, institutional fear. Bastian looked back toward the synchronization lattice. The missing harmonic source remained absent. Cold moved through him, not panic, recognition. Because the worst part was not the silence itself. It was how quickly the systems around him had begun behaving as though the silence could be normalized. A senior curator official moved toward the central chamber platform and addressed the surrounding personnel. All verification teams will maintain procedural discipline until the Synod completes harmonic assessment. No speculative conclusions are to leave this chamber. The words echoed softly through the resonance hall beneath the low hum of unstable harmonics. Bastian barely heard the remainder. His attention remained fixed on the widening instability patterns spreading outward from the missing choir source. Tiny distortions, early strain fractures, the beginning of systemic redistribution. He had seen systems attempt to compensate for impossible conditions before. That was how collapses began, quietly at first, then all at once. Celine stepped beside him again. Bastian. He did not answer immediately. Somewhere beyond the threshold, across distances too vast for human comprehension, an ancient stellar harmony had gone silent. And for the first time since Antiphon Vigil, Bastian realized he was afraid not only of being right, but of what would happen if he stayed silent this time.